Wait till I can see us on the stream and then we'll start talking.
You guys don't hear a child screaming in the background, do you?
No.
Yeah.
Love to see Eddie Mike.
I mean, besides mine.
No screaming. All right, we are live. Great. All right. Hey everybody. Welcome. Normally you see us playing various tabletop games over here on Rivals of Waterdeep. We've been playing a lot of D&D, but most recently, in our off season, we've been playing a awesome system called Kids on Bikes. And we're happy to be joined by the co-designers of Kids on Bikes, Doug Lewandowski and John Gilmore. Welcome.
Hello.
for
I
having
guess we
us.
should say,
Thank you for having us.
yeah. I guess we should say who we are first. I'm Shareef Jackson. And Masood Hawk, our Kids on Bikes DM, is also here. It's been a fascinating system that we've been working with. So why don't y'all start off by just telling us just like the origin story, like how'd you come up with the idea, and like how that was actually executed into a product.
Sure. So, God, what was it? 4 summers ago?
I think so.
When Stranger Things came out, I watched that, and I was exclusively into board game and card game design back then. And watched a couple episodes and like posted on Facebook, like, all right, who's doing the Stranger Things board game with me that like already started cooking in my head?
Mm-hmm.
And John responded and said, I'm actually working on one already. And I was like, oh, can I get in on that? And he said, well, no, because he already had somebody working with him on it. And he said, but we should do an RPG. And so we kicked around a bunch of ideas. I made a bunch of overly complicated suggestions. And we eventually streamlined until we got to what we wound up with.
One of my favorite stories from the early days on it was we're talking about how in like Stranger Things, Dungeons and Dragons kind of feels like a little bit of a character in the show, or the side thing that kind of permeates it.
Yeah.
And we wanted some odes to like D&D, because that's what we grew up playing. And Dud was like, "What if we brought back Thaco?" Which for people who haven't played Second Edition, is one of the worst game design things ever.
It's terrible.
Yeah, it's just extra math on top of math.
Okay.
And I was like, no.
The part that
And then
everyone loves about role-playing games.
yeah.
Hold up, let me bust out my calculator. Yeah.
Check this table. There.
But once we dismissed that, we started talking about that subject more, and that's how we came up with the idea of using a full set of polyhedrals for the stats.
Yeah, I really loved when I first came across that. I think it was just so interesting to explain and like bring up the fact that there are no modifiers other than what you like. Yeah, what you put yourself in, other than what you earn through the diversity tokens. But like you innately just have this ability, and that feels. I don't know. I like the intuitiveness in a role play of like, hey, I'm going to try this. If it's like a planned action, I'm going to try this thing. It might seem weird. That character's doing it right at that moment. They might just have a more likelihood, but they could also just completely biff it or like, yeah, no, I really dug that sort of design aesthetic because then it also builds out and feeds into the role play in a fun way.
Yeah, we really wanted it to, and we wanted that kind of like power disparity in each player character of having like some things you're really good at and some things you're mediocre at.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
it
Go ahead.
had a dual purpose of preventing min-maxing, which we didn't want.
Yeah.
And originally, when we were first working on it, one of the first things that we were really thinking about in designing it was this idea of duality, right? Like a complementary opposites and all that. And initially, the stats were paired, and so fight and flight went together. And if you had a D20 in fight, you necessarily had a D4 in flight.
Right.
Charm and grit and brains and brawn. And so those were always at odds with each other. And then if you had like your D8 and your D10 stat repaired and your D6 and your D12 stat repaired.
Sure.
But after a couple play tests, we just said, like that's too, like you can have smart, strong guys. Like that's fine. Like you can have a tough and charming character. Like it doesn't have to, things aren't that binary with people.
Yeah.
And so we moved away from that, which I'm glad about, but that was a sort of like initial design that got play tested out.
I really appreciate hearing that because I like feel it when I'm playing the game. The idea of letting folks at the table provide nuance, like especially as your character building, as you're building the world, it is a lot of I think, at least while reading through it, like one of the first steps is what are your boundaries for everybody? What's everyone sitting at the table with? And I like while we were doing it, we're like, hey, we can set this game in any time period that we want. And we're like, well, we're all people of color on Rivals, so not any time period technically. And I don't know, I had a moment I was like, no, any time period, because this is a game, and we can do whatever we want with it. The game allows it to be like designed as such, and to see that like sort of play through, at least in the thought process of the other mechanics as you build like a role-playing game, it was really nice to feel.
Cool. Thank you. I'm glad you. Thanks.
Yeah. I think one of the most fun things I had was at the beginning when we were sort of building the world together, right? So we had these questions that we were kind of doing in like a round robin way, where like we were each kind of filling in details and kind of playing off of each other, which I felt was great. Was there any sort of discussion if you wanted to have sort of a set world that you had, or like did like you begin with that, or like did you begin with the current thing where like everyone builds it like together?
I think we started with the collaborative world building right away because that was something that I really liked about Powered by the Apocalypse games. And Doug, I don't think I'd played any PTBA.
A couple, yeah, but not.
Or PVTA. Yeah, but you hadn't played. Yeah, so that was the conversation that we had, and I really liked that, like the relationship building and the world building. So we kind of really wanted to like do even more of that.
Yeah, and in terms of stuff that got iterated most, probably those character relationship questions. We tested those. Probably half of our play tests were focused on those, even if it included other stuff. We really put those through the ringer because we wanted that to be what generates the story. And like you were talking about before with like the whole improv thing before we went live.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, like, I really love that collaborative style. As a background, like, I'm an actor, I'm an improviser here in Chicago, and that felt really intuitive for me in terms of, like, how we're building the world, of, like, the layered facts that we all agree to. And because it's done in a round robin, it feels very equitable as well. So, like, you're able to, like, really provide input and have it. I might have one idea of where it's going when I ask my question. But the question before me might completely shift it, or I might be hit with something that I wasn't expecting. And that, I think, really allows for it to feel really real in the way that even the sometimes nonsensical things you say as a joke, like, feels grounded almost, because with everything else happening, all the other input, it kind of gets leveled out.
Yeah, and like it just provides that amazing like sense of investment, you know, because I remember after we had our first session 0, when we kind of built everything, I was like ready to just jump in, you know, whereas I feel like, you know, when like you're playing in like a more standard like campaign that a DM either homebrews or, you know, or builds off of a campaign, there's a sense of mystery that the players have as they're going in. There's still a sense of mystery here, but like you're like, well, I know the boundaries because I helped to create them. And then of course, like Masood, he takes that and he turns it all around, and he and he like plays around with it. But like I just love that. Like I remember I felt like even though we spent like 3 hours on our session 0, like building everything, I was like, hey, let's just jump in right now.
Right.
Nice.
It's fun, especially like what ends up feeling to me really driving for the surreal, or like the, now that you've built like this idyllic or non-idyllic, like small town or small neighborhood, the rumors were really fun, like hearing what other people sort of lay what and would become the thematic running point of whatever you're dealing with. Yeah, because for me, when I was building out our campaign, one of the things came up was that there was a peach farm in upstate New York, and I was like, peaches are from Georgia. Like I don't think the land in upstate New York would be tenable for that. But I was like, okay, fine, we run with it. And then someone said the man who runs the peach farm was a serial murderer, and I was like, okay, well those two have to be linked now. And like that was the rumor that got built out of like one of the truths, and I was like, perfect, let's run this and way could go. And that, yeah, once again, like just the ever so delicious but ever so tall sandwich that the game becomes is, yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah. And anytime I GM, I love to use those rumors as like, these are the things that your character believes, right? But like growing up, we all had these things we believed about, like, like my 6th grade teacher was a bodybuilder. Like you could not convince me otherwise. Even though we were like, Mr. Nelson, you're a bodybuilder, right? And he was like, no, I work out to stay healthy. Like that's what I do. We're like, but like Mr. Universe, right? And so like in my head, that was absolutely true. And so when I GM, I love to play with those. And like, if you're saying like these two are spending all this time together because I think this is an example we have in the book, like the principal and the vice principal are having an affair. And that's why like, they're always like, we see them together outside of school. That's the rumor. The truth is they're part of a secret organization.
Exactly. Right.
And then to sort of like play into that and then pull the rug out is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No. I was waiting for you.
Oh, yeah. And I was gonna say it kind of goes into like where some of the safety tools are great too. Like it lets the players give input into the campaign. Like if Dud says like, oh, I heard there's ghosts in this school. Like it lets me as a GM know like, oh, well, he's really interested in that. So I can kind of focus and let him make that shine at some point too.
Absolutely. Like speaking of safety tools, one of the things that jumped out to me was the intention. And I'd love to hear about like whether the intentionality came out, but the level to ableism and accessibility are like not really a deterrent in your character design. And I really appreciated that, at least in the rule book, like basically stating it out, like you can have this person and they can roll a fight check. They can still do that even if they might not be physically able to in this, like you can create a narrative around it. And I'd love to hear from you all if that would like, how did that sort of topic, or like where did that sort of what was the conversation that might have led to that?
Yeah, so we had it out for playtesting, and one of the people who was reading over the rules sent both of us an email and said, hey, I love this system. I really like that you have these these strengths and these flaws, and I really want to play a character who's like me. Like I was born with physical disabilities, and I'll have them all my life. And so if I were building a character based on myself, would my flaw be that I'm disabled in the way I am? And that just like, that crushed me, right? Like we have a player who's like passionate about this, who's like, okay, cool. I want to play this game. And I guess the best way for me to interpret this is that like the way I am is a flaw. And I was like, man. And so John and I talked about that. And we worked, we put a lot of effort into that section and having it be with Anton's help, the guy who sent us the email, to try to get it to be really clear, like you were saying, that this is this is something that makes your character who you are. It's not a flaw. It's not a weakness. It just, it is.
Exactly.
And I mean, John and I always, I mean, one of the things we bonded over early on, even before we started working on this, was just our absolute belief that games are for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And that everybody who sits down at the table should feel like they're welcome at the table, should feel happy to be at the table, should feel valued at the table.
Mm-hmm.
And so that email from Anton really made us realize, like, we have to build that in. It's not just because we feel that certain way about gaming.
Yeah.
That might not come through in the rules, right? Just because we feel it doesn't mean we've said it.
Mm-hmm.
And so going through and making sure that that was super, super explicit was, came out directly out of Anton's email.
Hell yeah. Well, thank you, Anton. And I really like, I don't know, the conversation and the inclusion that comes into its design it makes it so everyone can have that investment, which I think was really nice. And Shareef, I'd love to hear from like a player's end, like, what was it like walking into session 1, having that like between session 0 and 1? Like, what was that like after building the world, and then like, okay, now we're gonna set foot in it?
I mean, at first I didn't quite know how to handle it, because I was like, do I know too much? You know, like as a player, like, do I know too much about the world? You know, like, I knew that you would throw in some stuff, but I was a little worried that I wouldn't have that same feeling of like, wow, I'm in an entirely new place I could have never imagined, you know? So I was a little worried about that. But when I went into the first game, it was almost like, and I don't know if this is intentional, but I felt comfortable. Like, I felt like this is a city that I know, but there's going to be things happen that I don't know, you know? So it actually helped me to get into the mentality of the character as somebody that's familiar with the festival and these rumors and the peach farm and stuff. So like, those aren't really like spoilers, I guess, even though I was worried like, oh man, I'm spoiled by some of this stuff. But those are things that any character that lives in this town like would know, you know? So like, it kind of gets you in the sort of, this is the everyday mundane stuff, you know? And then the sort of like surprises are what, you know, like, you know, are what the GM is able to like come with. And like, yes, it's based on some of the rumors and stuff that we talked about, but it's in such a unique way that it was still a surprise. So like, I really like that the collaborative storytelling made me feel like I was a citizen, like I was a member of this place.
Yeah.
You know?
I think it was really cool to also do the relationship questions after that, because it seemed, even though like with any adventuring party, you know, there's a rule of like something brings you all together before the adventure starts, right? And at least the way your character was designed was they didn't know them, right? He was like relatively was a character that nobody in the group knew, but because of the small town atmosphere and like doing those questions, you still were able to like in any moment, and you live in like these spaces, have your insights, I'd say, about other individuals. Yeah, and I because I loved watching your role play with Tanya's character because of those questions, because like it immediately show up. I knew why you were behaving the way you were behaving, and like other people at the table already got it, but we didn't have to say it as explicitly.
Yeah. It was a really cool. So yeah, as like a player, just going in that session, I was like, oh, I live here. I live here now.
Yeah.
And what's gonna happen? So one thing that was also interesting for me to like experience as like a player was the concept of like failing and adversity tokens. Really curious as to how y'all came about that, because I know, like, you know, being playing mostly like a D&D, like, you know, like when you roll a 1 or you roll low, you know, like there's no real advantage or no like positivity to it, you know. So yeah, how'd you come across, you know, like how how'd you come to the way that failure is handled in the game?
Go ahead. Dan.
Oh, okay. Because that was mostly you. Like that was. But yeah, early on when we were talking about it, that's something that Powered by the Apocalypse does really well too, right? And that was one of the core things that John was really big on when we were working on this, about everything should feel narrative, right? A success is narrative, a failure is narrative. And that idea that, and this is something I learned from playing Fiasco, that a success or a failure is what the character is after. But for the table, everything should be a success, right? If my character tries to outrun the monster but gets caught, that should still feel like a success for the table, because it's going to push the story in this different, interesting way.
Yeah.
But also to sort of encourage people to feel good about failure. That's where that idea of the adversity tokens came in, where, okay, you may have, boffed it on this one, but you can next time contribute to this, or you can use those adversity tokens for your strengths. And that there is that sort of benefit to having that resilience to get back up after a failure and keep going.
Yeah, there's kind of a couple things that we really wanted to do in the design, and one of those was we always wanted to design towards big moments, because I think that's the thing that makes games super memorable. When you have those, huge moments, like the exploding dice is another thing that really factors into that. Like when somebody rolls, their 4-sided die and it explodes repeatedly. Like we were originally just going to limit it to one explosion. And then we were like, why not just let it explode as many times as it can? Because that'll be incredible when it does. But like the adversity tokens too factor into that. Like you can save them up and have these huge moments where, everybody works together. Your friend fails that roll trying to get over the fence, running away from the killer, but everybody throws in adversity tokens and they all like help pull them over at the last second, and you just barely scrape by, but it's this memorable moment. So it factors into that. And the other thing is we wanted to kind of bring in some like board game mechanics, because in my board game design, I always tried to lift things from RPGs. Like there's a lot of RPG inspired stuff in like Dead of Winter. But like in this, we wanted the board game style mechanics. We wanted skills to feel mechanical and not, just like, oh, I have swimming, so I get +1 whenever I try to swim.
Right.
Like that's not very exciting. We wanted, cool skills that you could spend stuff on. So that was why we wanted to, make sure we were generating a lot of adversity tokens, so that players could play with them all the time and do stuff and keep doing that fun thing.
And it kind of feels like you're learning a lesson and that you're using that to your advantage in whatever way, shape, and I like, even if it's not explicit, like, well, just because I failed that roll from like early on in the session, I can still use that to my advantage. And it, once again, coming from like an improviser background of like collaborative storytelling, I love that. I really like that, because then it drives the narrative for it. Like that is what everyone's focused on. It isn't the min-max. I don't want to get the most damage possible on this big thing. Let's tell a cool story. And doing it collaboratively, you're obviously going to see things and with a system evoke things that a single narrator couldn't do.
Yeah. So I have a question for you, Masood.
Yeah.
as the GM. After you finished the session 0, like, did you finish it like, wow, how am I going to put all these ridiculous ideas that everybody brought out here? Or like, was it more like, you could instantly see how these things kind of interlocked? Because I know I was thinking like, man, if I'm jamming this, like you really have to, it's almost more challenging in one aspect than sort of going off of a book and homebrewing, and changing stuff. So how, as a GM, how do you handle linking all these things together?
Honestly, it was something that felt I needed to think about. And like I got out of like, there's so much stuff here. I want to like sit on it. And then it came to me. Like it was really like what felt right. Cause you guys, the best way to describe it is like you guys gave me such good seeds, like such great seeds. And I wanted to just like let them soak, let them sit. And as they started to like grow, I really like, it was like, let's run with it. Cause it could go anywhere, and whatever I kind of did it within the bounds that we said that we're okay. We're in the lines of like the game that we designed. It feels rewarding. It feels your yield is fruitful. And yeah, I don't know. I really was probably thinking about it throughout the week because thankfully we had a week in between. And by the second day, I was so for it. I'd also been watching Lovecraft Country, so that was like a little bit inspiration for me. But
Heard that's so good.
It's great.
It's incredible.
But yeah, so like for me, that's how at least I developed the story or came with it. Yeah, I'd love to actually hear from you all about like one of the things that I think is fascinating is the positive and negative sides of the relationship questions, and there's so many of them, which is really like delightful to have in a space because we have 3 other people who are playing our game, and we did the full questions, and we maybe got to one that re-rolled that we had to like re-roll or pick another. There was like enough there to mine and like dig content from. And I'd love to hear about you all, like how did that come about? How did that list we were like, this is the list we want to use, or lists rather.
A lot of it was brainstorming and playtesting. I think they may have been a little bit shorter at first, but we really just kind of picked a number to start with. We went with, that because it could be common across them and it uses one of the dice that we were using.
Absolutely.
But we knew that we wanted a lot there. So, people wouldn't see repeats within the creation process. And, we also wanted like, even if you did see a repeat, they were kind of open-ended enough that you could interpret them in different ways too.
Yeah.
And that when we first started, a lot of them were more generic, right? Like, what's a good memory you have with this character? And then our friend Jay Treat, who's a tabletop and role-playing game designer, was like, and I love just his like absolute honest feedback. He was like, hey, this is like a great idea. These questions are boring. Like, do you go to school together? We're like, yeah, okay, fine. He was like, when did you first realize you loved this character, either romantically or platonically? And we're like, go ahead. What other? He's like,
yeah. The questions are meaty. Yeah,
a handful came like directly from him. And then once that sort of clicked, it was like, because initially we were thinking, hey, if you have this sense of your character, we want to make sure that these questions, like any of these questions, can fit in. But then we shifted it sort of almost 180 to, you might have a sense of your character, but you might pull that question and go, oh, I guess we're going in this direction then, right? Like,
I really love catching the folks off guard, because I think that like that instant leads to a lot of fun inspiration as well for the design.
Right. So like if you do the full and you have an overall negative relationship with one character, and then you, for your positive one, roll, when did you first realize you love this character? If you stick with that, you can always re-roll, right? And that was what we eventually settled on for, like, well, if you get one where you're really like, this doesn't work. But if I get that one and I lean into it, then it's like, okay, why do I have this negative relationship with this character I love, right? Do we have a past, right? Were we like the very best of friends and they betrayed me in some way? And so now I still love them, but I don't ever want to talk to them again. Sure. Or do I have this like overwhelming, like it's beyond a crush, man, you don't understand kind of thing with them. Or whatever, right? There's so many directions you go with it. And we wanted those really like in media analysis, they were calling it back in the day, pop, right? Like those moments in a TV show or a movie where like the whole audience just goes, right? Like that big reveal or like whatever.
Mhm.
And so we wanted those moments right in character creation where it's like, oh, like we're going this way now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we definitely had those moments. I remember like Masood would pull these questions out, and we would almost be more entertained by the questions themselves
Mhm.
than the possible answers. It was definitely like, whoa, what is going on?
Yeah.
You know, you're right in that it did help me to rethink my character, hearing some of the questions, and the questions that like I had to answer as well. I had a lot less because I was kind of like on more of the not known, I wasn't really known by a lot of the characters, which I also think is like a great choice. Yeah, it definitely like having these spicier questions, like it definitely kind of like made the character creation like, so this is the kind of game that this is. Okay, okay, all right. You know,
And
it like set that very well.
and I love that about it because it's definitely, if you built your characters in a world that I had established, I don't think I could have thought of making these dynamics or thinking of a way where they could come up organically. But because you drop folks in where like, hey, what is the backstory? What is the backstory before? What's our prologue look like? Yeah, I think it gives a really fun way to then build off and like move. Which also I like. If we're gonna move, if you don't mind me asking, like thinking about prologue and story, I'd love to hear more about your powered character and like the design of like building a powered character. Like no one in our group has a powered character, but that's not to say some NPCs I might not be using that to make things equitable in my certain design. Yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit about it.
Well, I mean, right away, that was a discussion we had because, I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, 11 is awesome in Stranger Things.
Mhm.
And even looking at like other stuff like, E.T. or Goonies or,
Mhm.
the other medias that we really dug into.
Yeah.
But we were like, well, if we let players be powered, like either everyone's going to want to be powered and have cool powers,
Mhm.
or one player is going to be powered and everyone's going to feel like they're on the sidelines or they're just supporting that cool character. So that's when we started discussing like, well, what if we just made that shared control? So like everybody had different aspects of it and got to equally participate in doing that, but not have just one person be that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was, I remember where we had the conversation, but I don't, because that was when you came out each summer, usually not last summer, obviously, but each summer we do like a week-long design retreat, either at my house or at John's house. And when we were working on that, it's funny because I remember where we were, but I don't remember who said which side, which is like what I love about collaboration. But we were going back and forth about this, and somebody said, yeah, I mean, I guess it's more fun if everybody could play a powered character. And then the other person said, well, what if everybody was playing the powered character?
Mm-hmm.
And it just sort of spiraled out from there.
Well, I think it feels fun because, like, look, Xander is great. Xander's a great addition to the Scooby Gang, but everyone watches the show for Buffy, right? But to feel as if we're building the story together, as we're like sort of designing it, I think it feels really valuable to be like, okay, we all control like this person. We all have the ability to build the narrative that then allows us to uplift this common thing. But yeah, which might be where our session 3 goes, Shareef. We'll see. Which is also like, sorry, I was reading the book and I loved it. The choose of like, I love the conversation around time existing between sessions and having folks like fill that gap.
Mhm.
That is something I feel like most games that I play we pick up exactly where we left off. Like that was the cliffhanger moment. What was the like decision behind making what was that decision like to add some time between sessions?
I think that got back to the media that we loved, and sort of like as we started working on it, started out as based on Stranger Things, but then it sort of spiraled out into, but it could also be ET, but it could also be Goonies, but it could also be Stand By Me.
Mm-hmm.
and those in a TV series between seasons, or in a, you know, if you have a movie with sequels between the first and the last, there's always like those big things that change, right?
Mhm.
Um, and we wanted to tap into that as a way to like, what are we doing now to like put some character tension back in, right? Because in a really good character story arc, right? Like Shareef, if your character is sort of the outsider, by the end of this story, he'll be brought in, I assume,
Yes.
right? And he'll be connected, but there won't be that potential for like, well, who's this new guy, right?
Mhm.
So what can we add then in between to have those hooks, to have those things like we resolved this rumor and this rumor, but now what's going on?
Mhm.
And that I think really came out of the considerations about the media that we consume that inspired us to do this, where stuff suddenly has changed between and there.
Well, even like relationship dynamics, did they get resolved or not? And what does that look like now, right?
Mhm.
Did bad feelings fester, or did something happen off screen that we'll later find out about, that like kind of like I really enjoyed I really like that sort of play that you give. It feels like you really wanted to build a sandbox that let people do what they want but still feel I don't want to mean this in a bad way, but like boxed in, like you were still in the
Yeah.
world, no matter how you design or like play with it.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I joke around that like the role playing game that I want to design
Mhm.
comes on an index card, and it just says "Tell a great story with your friends." I mean, like it gets down to that, right? I want anytime I work on something, I want it to be something where
Mhm.
you feel that you feel like you have this unlimited possibility within these bounds, right?
Well, and another big design philosophy that we talked about a lot was making it accessible to new gamers who haven't played RPGs before.
Yeah.
Because like I grew up in a really, really small town in upstate New York, and nobody played D&D. So like my introduction to D&D was buying all the second edition books and trying to teach it to myself.
Mhm.
And like they are the worst written rule books in history, because they don't actually teach you how to play the game.
Right.
They like give you the rules, which is great, but until you find a group and like really learn about it, you know, you just staring at all this stuff and you understand the mechanics, but not how.
Mhm.
And we wanted to do a lot of things. You know, even the questions are part of that design. Like you asking the players things in character teaches players who haven't played RPGs to answer in character,
Yeah.
and it helps like ease them into that. So all those,
Mhm.
you know, even into the subject that we're talking about, are things that are designed to help with that.
Awesome. We actually have a couple questions from the chat that I want to make sure that we get to.
Yeah, we do.
The first
Oh,
one
sorry,
is
go ahead.
I'll let me grab this one, and you want to grab the
No,
next one?
good. Yeah, good.
Awesome. This is a question from Raving Sock Monkey. I got a question for John and Doug. Out of the different playbook character archetypes, what are your personal favorites?
Boy,
Let me grab my book so I know exactly, since we've done let's see.
I really like the conspiracy theory character.
Yeah.
Like whether you played as a teen or an adult, I think they're both fantastic.
Mhm.
You can play that adult that's on the fringe of society that kind of lives in a cabin, or you can play the teen that's just kind of, you know, has just discovered weed and thinks everybody's out to get him and has expanded his mind. So it's a really fun trope to play.
I think it also, I like that one because it also thematically lines up with your story elements, right? It's the fun with the person who oftentimes finds redemption in being either kind of right or more right than they could ever imagine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we actually have a character, Latia Jakis, that plays a conspiracy theorist, and we basically came up with this thing through the questions that she has a rivalry with the local DJ because she keeps trying to share her conspiracy theories since the DJ has this platform, but she's not being heard. So yeah, it just opens up all kind of great avenues.
That's so good
for it.
My two favorites, I think, are the funny sidekick, because I really like the characters who are sort of like, I'm here for support. And I also really like the wannabe. I really like that idea of like being on the outside, and that sort of like, because I super identify that from my high school years of like not being the cool kid, but being like, but it's so easy. Like they're all just right there. And like, I do the things they do. Why am I not?
Right.
And so I think that also has like really good places to go with more serious role playing and more like more change over time. Whereas the funny sidekick, if I'm doing a one-off, is like the one that I want to go to for like, okay, well, we're going to have some laughs and it's going to be this like silly kind of Gravity Falls inspired kind of thing. I'll be the
That's probably my second favorite.
Yeah.
I'll never forget the what do we call that character? The fartriloquist.
Fartriloquist, yeah.
I like that. I really like the what's it called, the sidekick, because it's like, I don't know. I think about narratives that I really enjoy, and they're like people who are a B+ grade at whatever they're working on. Like they're good, but they're not the best. And like that is such good, like for me, I love it. I love reading those stories. It just feels like it feels so relatable, and also like where good narrative can drive from. I think Shareef, you want to check out this other question?
Yeah. So the second question is from Glipster. Says, how did you come up with the idea to use all kinds of dice for the system from D4 to D20? Since I mostly see other systems limiting the kind of dice needed mostly to D6s, D10s, or another combination. So like, how'd you decide on the dice that you wanted to use?
That was a big part of that, was our homage to D&D.
Right.
And then when initially we were thinking about this as a Stranger Things game, trying to pay homage to that in the show, but then it worked out so nicely with the stats that we just kind of couldn't. I mean, I couldn't imagine getting rid of it at this point.
And for new players too who haven't played RPGs, give them an excuse to go out and buy a full set of cool dice, and not just a bunch of D6s that they probably. I mean, having a common die like D6 is nice because you can just steal them from another game like Monopoly, but having cool dice is fun.
Yeah, and like nowadays you can go to like a Target or any store, which is kind of amazing to think about. You can go to any store and buy like a set of D20 dice now. It's pretty amazing.
Or also, like, I mean, your game's available on Roll20, so you don't even have to like own die. You can just like roll virtually, or there are now so many systems. I really, we talked a little bit about it earlier as well, but I want to actually stick on this a little bit, because the second part of this question I thought was really interesting too, is like how much math was done to check if it works out. And I want to ask that in relationship to the way you guys want narratively driven skill checks, like where you're like, hey, this is what a 7 to 9 means. And so like comparative with those skills. Yeah. What did that, I know we've been talking a lot about playtesting, but I don't know like how that sort of conversation came out.
I know I wrote up a bunch of stuff somewhere about this dungeon. I don't remember where it was. Was it RPG Geek? Somebody was talking about the percentile, because really you have a slightly higher percentage of beating the average of a 6-sided die with a 4-sided die with explosions. But it's a very small difference.
Right.
Well, sort of. It depends what your target number is. But yeah.
And the math works out. When we uncapped explosions, it threw it off a little bit. But again, we wanted those big moments. And there's a thing in game design that I like to call fun balancing, where a thing is like, you can make it very mathematically balanced, but it's not fun. And sometimes you have to like take those numbers and kick them around a little bit and be like, well, this isn't really fair, but it's really fun when the players do it.
Yeah, I'm trying
Yeah,
to.
it's
I'm
like
popping
part
on
of the
Board Game
art
Geek.
of
I'm
it,
going to try
right?
to find that link. I'll put it in the Zoom.
Oh, that's great. We can then throw it into the Twitch
Cool.
chat.
It's like part of the art of design that I've heard from everybody, from people that do video games, from people that program in any way. There's like the technical part, but there's also like the does it really feel good if like Mario like jumped at a gravity on Earth, even though it's real? You know?
Yeah, if he could jump a realistic amount, the Mario games wouldn't be fun at all, right?
Nope.
Yeah. It's like always about like that art of like what feels good, you know. And I'm sure that that's like the last part of getting the game to feel great.
And we really focused on that feeling during playtesting. You know, we made sure to check in with the players a lot. You know, asking like if it felt useful to use the smaller dice, or if you felt like, you know, you should always use your bigger dice, and, you know, making sure that there weren't trends in the gameplay that disrupted the fun.
I think also like with adversity tokens coming in to like serve as a nice little buffer sometimes, like for those moments. Those feel really satisfying when they do happen, when you do pass that skill check, or when you just explode a roll, right? I know you guys have also, and like your team have been a part of not only Kids on Bikes, but like Kids on Brooms and some other games. This is a personal question. What is the next iteration? Is it Kids on Cyber Wheels? Is it Kids on spaceships? Like, where do you guys feel this sort of thematic ride takes you?
Well, we did Teens in Space.
Teens in Space. Very
So we got to do. I think Dud will agree with. We a little bit regret the Teens name.
Yep.
Like now we've decided to just stick with the Kids X theme. But Teens in Space was like they kind of gave us a few options when we talked to Renegade and Hunters, and everybody threw some ideas in. I think everybody kind of really wanted us to do Kids on Bikes or Kids on Brooms. But Doug and I were like, well, what if we do Space first? Because that's the one we're excited about.
We were about halfway through it when Scott mentioned the name Kids on Brooms, and we were like, yeah, that's the next one, but we got to wrap this one up first.
For sure.
I don't think we can say what the next one is, but we're working on it.
Okay. All right.
Kids on a break.
Kids on a break. Understandable.
Break a little bit.
That's good.
It's one that Doug immediately said he didn't want to do, and then I showed him some media that convinced him otherwise.
Yep.
Heck yeah. Very cool. I'll take that teaser. That is a comfortable place to appease my appetite.
We'll tell you after the stream.
Okay, cool. Ooh, for me only. But yeah, I know I really like the sort of direction that Kids on Bikes leads for folks. I think it's definitely inspired me as someone who I mentioned, like I run the campaign for Rivals. I've done one other game, but I haven't really delved into it. Like I'm excited to play more, and in it, looking forward to checking out. Now that I'm ashamed of it, I did not know about Teens in Space before this moment, and now to like think about it, it's like that's great. I have so many ideas. Is it Star Trek? Is it Star Wars? Is it I gotta find out.
What do you want it to be?
Exactly. And see, that is the answer that I thought it would ask me.
Get that index card.
So kind of the cool thing we did with Teens in Space was instead of having the powered character, you shared control of the ship, and you customize the ship and gain points that you can put into it to make your ship cooler.
I love that. That's obviously in those medias, which I also really appreciate. It feels like you all do a lot of homage in the right way to like the genre or source material that you all are like building out for us to play in. And like I really like thinking about. Yeah, I really like the idea of the spaceship. It's like everyone oftentimes in those things, like if we look at Firefly, if we look at all these other shows, like everyone is also a crew member alongside of anything else they are.
I even made the argument that like Guardians of the Galaxy is a Teens in Space movie. Like even though they're all adults, like they're pretty much teenagers.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's in the rules about like you don't necessarily have to be in that adolescent range for whatever species you are,
Yeah.
but you have really bad impulse control. Whatever it is, your fatal flaw is just always picking at you to like go do that one thing that you know you shouldn't do.
Mhm.
So I should say though, back to the question about what's next, we have a couple things that have been announced that we are allowed to talk about. For Teens in Space, we have we did Strange Adventures Volume 1 and Volume 2 for Kids on Bikes. We're doing, I don't think we've settled on the exact name for it. It's not Space Adventures because we don't want another essay. But we have 2 4-part adventures written by people who did adventure prompts in Strange Adventures Volume 2. Kristen and Tim Devine, who did the North Sea Epilogues role-playing game, put together a really sandboxy kind of 4-part adventure. And then Cleo Yunsu Davis, who did No Such Place as Koreatown in Strange Adventures Volume 2, is putting together more of a linear 4-part adventure for Teens in Space. And then in the sort of universe, this was just recently announced, and I'm really glad I can start talking about it.
Yeah.
Luke Minch, who's a buddy of mine who does a lot of play testing with me, he and I worked on a card game that wasn't originally in the Kids on Brooms universe, but sort of fit naturally in, called Duel of Wands, a 2-player heads-up card battling game.
Very cool.
Where you're trying to sling spells at your opponent. And so that'll be coming out. I don't know that there's an official announcement date yet, but Renegade has officially stated that it's coming. So now I'm allowed to do the same.
Heck yeah.
Awesome.
We got to keep our eyes peeled. Those sound awesome. I also like, for folks who are excited about this media, who want to check out Kids on Bikes or any of these games, particularly for Kids on Bikes, I'd recommend the House on Poplar Court. Like, it's a great introduction to the world and like they even have some like already pre-designed characters that you can sort of build out in your own way. That's available on Roll20. That's how we ran it. But yeah, it's very new player friendly, or even an expert level player.
Yeah, Ryan did an excellent job with that. That was our free RPG day 2 years ago, I think. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think thank you all so much for joining us. Is there anything that you want to leave the people with, maybe socials or things that you're working on, or things like that? Let's start with John. Anything you want to share with the audience?
You can find me on Twitter at John Gilmore, JONGILMOUR. I don't think I have anything I can announce right now as far as stuff I'm working on, but I mean, keep an eye on Twitter or, Board Game Geek or RPG Geek is a good place to watch.
Okay, sweet. And Doug?
I'm on Twitter at Levzilla, LIVZILLA, which is a joke that one of my students made, and I didn't think I'd be using Twitter that much when I put it up there. But so big upcoming stuff. I just recently put out a game called Aunt Agatha's Attic, which is a real-time trading card game about squabbling cousins. So you have 2 minutes to get as much stuff from your aunt's house as she'll give you. And what else?
Can you play that as adults? Because that feels meaner as as an adult.
You should absolutely play it as adults. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's that came out from Chronicle Books, and it's available, I think, pretty much everywhere. And then keep an eye on Twitter. I have a Kickstarter actually coming next week, I think, really soon, for a game I worked on over the summer with somebody who interned with me, called Arcane Zoo, which is a journaling game about running a magical zoo.
Oh, very cool.
So that'll be up real soon.
Yeah.
That's everything announced. A couple other things in the works, but nothing official.
Best way to
So.
keep in touch is follow you both on Twitter to keep all those
Yeah.
updates. Yeah.
Yeah, and we love to hear about people's games. We love to hear about like the crazy stuff that happens, those big moments like John was talking about. So, yeah.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, we were. I don't know if this is a big moment, Masood, but we were chased by leaf people. That was,
Leaf people?
From a leaf men created from an ancient
Leaf.
ritual to Baal, do the standard stuff.
You gotta watch those ancient rituals.
yeah, very standard. Anything you want to share, like Masood, before we get out of here?
Yeah, hey, follow us at Rivals of Waterdeep. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at MaroodBoy. Yeah, we'll be back on our channel playing the second session of Rivals on Bikes. We're really excited about that, sponsored by Blue Microphones. And then we'll also be doing a show for PAX, and it's gonna be great.
Oh, awesome.
Big busy day.
Yeah. So tomorrow at noon Central is our Kids on Bikes game, and then right after on the PAX channel is our Rivals of Waterdeep, our D&D show. So that's 3 games in 4
days. Yeah, because we had the one last night too.
We had one last night. So
my butt imprint's gonna be so strong in that chair. I tell you what.
Yeah. So once again, Doug and John, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes.
Thank y'all to everybody out in the chat and watching. If you're watching this on the VOD or listening to the audio podcast, make sure to check our Twitter when we announce our live streams and all that stuff at Rivals Waterdeep. For that, we will be out. Have a great weekend, everyone.